wealthiest countries in the world. The continent is rich with natural resources and has a vast population, leading to high GDP. However, despite this wealth, many countries are still mired in poverty. But first, let's look at the list of the top 10 richest African nations based on GDP per capita. You might be wondering, what exactly is GDP per capita? GDP, or Gross Domestic Product per capita, is a financial metric that breaks down a country's economic output per person and is calculated by dividing the GDP of a nation by its population. It is a global measure for gauging the prosperity of nations and is used by economists, along with GDP, to analyze the prosperity of a country based on its economic growth. Now that you know what GDP per capita means, let's go straight into our list. Here is a list of the top 10 richest countries in Africa by GDP per capita. Number 1, Seychelles. First on our list is Seychelles, a small island in the Indian Ocean situated off East Africa. It's the richest country in Africa, with a GDP per capita of 26,120 people and a population of 99,045 people living in a land area of 460 square kilometers. Seychelles has the highest currency in Africa, the Seychelles rupee. Seychelles has an impressive GDP per capita mainly because of its robust tourism industry, contributing significantly to its GDP. Tourism accounts for about 40% of national GDP and roughly 70% of foreign currency earnings. Number 2, Mauritius. Off the coast of Africa in the Indian Ocean is the island nation of Mauritius. Per capita, it is one of the most developing nations in Africa, consisting of 1.3 million people living in a 2,030 square kilometer area, with a total GDP per capita of $22,030. The economy of Mauritius was initially based on sugarcane plantations, but it has since expanded into textiles, tourism, and banking. France, the United Kingdom, and other African nations account for 80% of its visitors. In order to compete with its neighbor, the South African economic giant, the government is expanding the national debt and investing in infrastructure. Additionally, Mauritius has a free port system, which means that any products made there and intended for export are exempt from taxes and duties. Number 3, Botswana. Botswana is a landlocked country in southern Africa. It is one of the richest nations on the continent in terms of per capita income. The country has 2.4 million people living in a 581,730 square kilometer area, and its average GDP per capita is $18,110. Botswana's economy has grown significantly thanks to the exports of beef and diamonds from the nation. After South Africa and Angola, Botswana is the country in Africa with the third largest dollar share of the continent's diamond production. About 50% of the nation's exports are diamonds. About 12% of GDP is accounted for by mining, and diamonds make about 80% of that. In Botswana, 1 in every 4 homes owns at least one diamond ring, pair of earrings, or pendant. Number 4, Gabon. Having a 16,240 GDP per person, 2.3 million people are living in a 257,670 square kilometer area. Gabon is a country in Central Africa that borders Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, the Republic of Congo, and the Gulf of Guinea on its western shore. It ranks in the top 10 richest nations in Africa in terms of per capita income. Gabon is one of the richest nations in Africa due to its abundance of natural resources, which include oil, lumber, manganese mining, and uranium ore. The country's oil production has been reduced by half as a result of the terrible economic crisis Gabon is currently experiencing. Inflation is high in Gabon since the GDP growth rate is low. It's currently negative 2.7%. Number 5, Madagascar. Madagascar is an island country in the Indian Ocean off the coast of East Africa. GDP per person is $13,720. 28.7 million people live there in a total area of 581,795 square kilometers. It is one of the 10 richest countries in Africa per capita, as well as one of Africa's poorest nations. Agriculture is the main driver of Madagascar's economy, contributing around 40% of its GDP. It is one of the world's most biodiverse nations, home to almost 5,000 plants, 89 different primates, 350 different bird species, and 60 different mammal species that are unique only to that country. But many of Madagascar's natural resources are being used by foreign nations without the payment of royalty or revenue sharing. Number 6, Egypt. Egypt has a population of 102.3 million, a GDP per capita of $13,080, and a land area of 995,450 square kilometers. Egypt is a nation in North Africa that is surrounded by Sudan to the south, the Mediterranean Sea to the north, Israel and the Gaza Strip to the northeast, the Gulf of Aqaba to the east, and Libya to the west. It has a strong African currency and ranks among the top 10 richest nations in Africa. Egypt has a long, ancient history that goes back thousands of years. Egypt has become one of the 5 most populous nations in Africa as a result of the fact that it is largely regarded as the cradle of human civilization. Agriculture, the creation of media, construction, tourism, and transportation comprise the bulk of Egypt's economy. In Egypt, agriculture accounts for almost 50% of all jobs. However, these resources have not been used efficiently, and the economy remains in flux. Still, the economy is doing relatively well, with an annual GDP growth rate of 3%, one of the highest in Africa. Number 7, South Africa. South Africa has a population of 60.3 million people and a land area of 1,213,090 square kilometers, with a GDP per capita of $12,440. Transport gear, processed minerals, chemicals, textiles, and food goods make up the majority of South Africa's economy, accounting for nearly half of its GDP. The industrial sector accounts for more than 35% of GDP, and 90% of exports are made up of minerals, primarily coal, gold, and diamonds. The nation is one of the richest in Africa due to its abundance of resources, including iron ore and chrome. However, the economy is still in flux since these resources have not been utilized effectively. Nevertheless, the economy is performing well, with one of the highest annual GDP growth rates of 3%. Number 8, Algeria. Algeria is one of the wealthiest countries in Africa with a GDP per capita of $11,430. Algeria significantly influences African affairs despite having a relatively small population of about 44.9 million, ranking 34th. It is the largest African country by landmass, covering approximately 2,381,740 square kilometers. Algeria's economy mainly relies on hydrocarbons and manufacturing, which account for about 60% of the GDP. Hydrocarbons contribute more than 95% to exports and 75% to government revenue. Manufacturing contributed less than 1/3 of GDP and employed about 16% of the workforce in 2014. Number 9, Tunisia. Despite having a population of only roughly 12 million, the country has a per capita GDP of $10,590. Tunisia has a considerable impact on African issues as well. Its currency is one of the strongest in all of Africa. Chemicals, semi-finished items, electrical equipment, and transportation equipment make up the majority of Tunisia's exports. The Sahara Desert's aridity limits Tunisia's available land resources. However, Tunisia has the potential for human resources, which attracts foreign investors from countries like Germany and Italy. Tourism, manufacturing, and mining together make up around 15% of Tunisia's GDP, which is mostly dependent on these sectors. The success of Tunisia's economy can be attributed to its economic policies, which have successfully established a secure financial climate that encourages foreign investment. Tunisia's reliance on aid from abroad decreased in 2014, falling to $183 million. And number 10, Namibia. Namibia, which is last on our list, is also one of the richest nations in Africa. With 2.3 million people living there and an area of 824,292 square kilometers, Namibia has a GDP per capita of $9,730. More than half of Namibia's GDP is generated by the mining, agricultural, manufacturing, and tourist sectors. Agriculture makes up around 12% of GDP, whereas mining makes up about 30%. Beef, lamb, and mutton are the principal agricultural products in Namibia, along with dairy goods, tobacco, and barley. The stable Namibian economy has a consistent growth rate of above 4%, which helps to explain its high GDP per capita. That's all for today's video, guys. Tell us your views in the comments section, and if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. See you in the next video. Cheers.